Yes, today's session is about the current and recent past of the Yale College Council. And I'd like to add my own age factor in this. And I was at Yale when there was no student government to speak of. So after all the panelists have introduced themselves, in their participation with the current and recent past of the Yale College Council, I'd like to start a discussion with their impressions of what kinds of things get done because there's a student government and that wouldn't get done if there weren't one. So let's start with, who wants to start? So 4 of you. Iris?
Yeah, I guess I can kick us off. I feel like with the student government, what gets done is mostly a concentration of what people say already on a daily basis, but rather...
Introduce yourself first.
Oh, sorry, I got too excited. My name's Iris. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from State College, Pennsylvania, and I'm a current junior in Pearson College, majoring in economics and mathematics as a joint major. This year's YCC Vice President, so just commenting on what I'm observing and experiencing right now. Yeah, so I feel like what student government does is a consolidation of student needs that kind of already unofficially happens. Like if you talk to your friends on a daily basis in college about what crops up in their daily lives, and it kind of pools that collective experience so that even though you might not personally experience a struggle, a hardship, or an opportunity, student government makes you aware of it by consolidating and kind of like bringing together a set of diverse opinions in that way. Yeah, I'll pass it off to Lolita.
Yes, hi, I'm Lolita Baraki. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior in Brantford, double majoring in biomedical engineering and African studies. And I'm the current YCC president, so YCC now. And I guess the purpose of student government to me is basically serving as a conduit for student needs and student interests, just like Iris said. I think when we're talking to administration, they can't hear 6,000 students, but they can definitely hear 2. And so our job is to meet with as many people as we can and hear as many experiences as we can, and then consolidate that into something that administration can internalize and then act on. Okay, I'll pass it on to Jeff.
Thanks, nice to meet you all. I'm Jeff Gordon, he, him pronouns. I grew up in Haverford, Pennsylvania, live in New York City now. I was the class of 2012. I was in Saybrook, American Studies major. I was the president of the Yale College Council in 2010 and 11. Yeah, I love the responses that we just heard. Something I would add on reflection years after the experience is that I think I took for granted how much of a kind of integrated campus experience we had at Yale compared to the college experiences of friends who went to other schools, where even though people are in different residential colleges, play on different sports teams, have different majors, have different day-to-day lives, I always felt there was a sense of like common awareness of what was happening throughout the student body. When there were controversies or problems on campus, everyone seemed to be aware of them at once. When there was a policy change being debated, everyone seemed to know something about it. I think we can credit a very strong student newspaper culture, honestly, as one reason Yale has that culture. But I think that YCC or student government's implicit role that I didn't quite realize at the time is to kind of like keep that sense of coherence of there being one campus. And you do that, I think, by kind of, as Lolita and Iris mentioned, sort of taking input from all of the diverse student groups and student experiences that are out there, bringing them into common forums to talk to each other, to talk to the administration. And even if you don't succeed in like changing policies and making improvements, which of course you seek to do, I think implicitly maybe what you achieve is kind of that sense of coherence of there being one student body and one campus experience.
Hey everyone, my name is John Gonzalez, and I was the Yale College Council president in 2012 and 2013. So so up on a decade now, and that decade has gone by very fast. I use he, him pronouns. I'm originally from Modesto, California, which is sort of a rural area smack dab in the middle of the state, and currently live in Los Angeles. I graduated from Yale in 2014 with a degree in economics, and was lucky enough to go back to get a law degree, which I finished up in 2020. When the question was posed, when I heard the question, I definitely went to where Jeff was going, and sort of our role as a pulse seeker, and an entity that's able to connect what is going on around us through different student groups and different sort of coalitions of interests, and be able to filter that to administrators, and to build relationships with them so that they can understand sort of the magnitude of those issues, and to be able to translate those issues in ways that they understand and can act upon. And along with sort of serving as a pulse reader and sharing that information with administrators, I think it's a key role in making different student requests into reality. I think over the years, Yale has always maintained a very strong culture of advocacy at the grassroots level, and that stuff bubbles up. And I think the Yale College Council, with its sort of organizational structure, consistency, and continuity over the years, can gradually take those different advocacy areas that students care about and try to make that into policy over time. And sometimes that takes a long time. Issues with gender neutral housing had existed long before I got to the Yale College Council and got on campus, and continue on things like credit defail is an issue that I still see on the Yale Daily News, and was an issue when I was a freshman on campus in 2010. And I think having an organization like the YCC to be able to chip away and implement those advocacy measures over time is a critical role, and a special one that I think only a student organization that's formally constituted could do.
I broke my own rule. I didn't introduce myself. Llewellyn Miller, class of 1970, Berkeley. I majored in something that I don't think exists anymore. I think it's called something else now. It was reincarnated, but it was mathematics, statistics, and operations research. But Jeff's comments made me think of something. When you said, you used the term common forum, and then John, you talked about bringing student moods or somehow their opinions to the administration to present a solution or a problem. How does that work? I mean, what's the mechanics of that? And I can't help but ask it from the context of having been at Yale when there was no student government. So I'm really curious about how that actually works. There were occasions in the 60s, as you can imagine, where there was communication between the students and the administration about several things, attitudes toward the Vietnam War and that kind of thing. And so everything was done ad hoc by topic. So I'm curious about the mechanisms, how that may have changed from the last 10, 12 years. And what's the actual mechanism? Who do you actually talk to in the administration? Anybody?
And maybe Leleda and Iris, since you are the current student leaders, can you talk about how that works today?
Yeah, I can explain it. We meet with a lot of different administrators just based on different topics. And the mechanics of it is the YCC is always writing policy proposals about different things that students are asking for. So for example, credit defail was brought up. So we'll write a policy proposal explaining why students want it, what peer institutions are doing. So Usually it's like, what's Harvard doing? What's Princeton doing? And then data like student anecdotes of why they want it, how it would help them. We'll sometimes pull things that are already on existing Yale websites to prove like if this is the standard that Yale wants to operate under, then this proposal should be enacted. And then depending on what policy branch it is, we meet with different administrators. So Iris and I have like 50 million meetings a week, it feels like. Our most consistent one is with Dean Lewis, who's the Dean of Yale College. So we'll go to him with lots of academics things. Sometimes it'll be like student life, things dealing with Schwartzman Center or financial aid. And then we have our financial policy team, and they'll meet with Dean Quinlan and Director Scott Wallace-Judas in the financial aid office. And then our health and policy team will meet with Dr. Jennison at Yale Health and Dr. Hoffman at Yale Mental Health and Counseling. And then we'll also, there's so many, oh my gosh. We'll also have like more niche meetings. For example, we'll meet with Vice President Goff Cruz when we're talking about university life overall, like outside of Yale College. And then once a year, YCC will meet with Yale Corporation, which is like the higher governing body of the university, to talk about like what are the needs of students now and what types of things should when approving university budgets or when advising the president. So yeah, we meet with various administrators, and as things come up, we'll sometimes reach out to specific administrators and ask for a meeting. For example, we were really interested in Yale's reporting system, so we reached out to people within the vice president's office. So yeah, a wide variety. Most of the time, it'll be very consistent and recurring meetings. So all of the university life deans will be at once. And like I said, we meet with Dean Lewis all the time. So it really just depends.
Well,
So how does the other side of that equation work? I heard you referring to what students want. How do you find out what students want?
that was my question.
I can tagline this later. Feel free to jump in if I'm missing something. Recently, I guess I can talk about a few formal avenues first. The YCC conducts an annual fall survey, which is sent out to all students, and we incentivize student participation, usually with lottery prizes. We did restaurant gift cards this year, and we got around 1,300 student responses, which is almost 20% of all students on campus. And to their credit, it is a very long survey. It is over 100 questions spanning what about their academic experiences have happened, their preparation for career and resource areas, cultural and religious experiences, health and accessibility needs that they've experienced, as well as dining and maybe some New Haven-centric questions as well. And we like to have open-ended questions on these kinds of forms too, because whenever you ask 1,000+ students, what could say be done better with regard to your financial aid or communication about it, they're very responsive. They're so vocal, in fact, that the compiled PDF of all the survey results is over 200 pages worth of information. So Leleda and I pass it off to our policy directors to sift through it and work through it. And we really take a lot of weight in what students tell us, especially whenever students will write up an entire paragraph kind of explaining their own situations or experiences with different departments. Another official avenue, just because the fall survey is just once a year, is that we have senators in 14 residential colleges. I guess John and Jeff, at your time, it was 12, which is so odd to me. But we have 2 representatives in each residential college who receive YCC funding to hold outreach events and really get to hear from students directly in their college, and they'll source those ideas back and bring them back to larger meetings so that people in the Senate who may not have heard of that but are interested in pursuing that project have the opportunity to jump on it. I feel like it's a very collaborative environment, and we very much welcome people to come to our meetings because all of our YCC meetings, Senate-wise, are open, and sometimes people will just come up to us on the street. Leleda and I have both experienced this. People are very audacious in the best way possible, but they'll just stop us on the street and be like, "Are you in YCC? I have this issue. I really experienced this." So we take notes of what people tell us, and I think people definitely feel very comfortable approaching people in the YCC whenever they have something that they don't really know what to do about, but that they've experienced on campus.
Is there any contact with the faculty on this? And
Yeah.
how does that work?
Just to add on to something Iris was saying, obviously we get a lot of student input, but we are also students, and so we have lots of opinions. I think the nice thing about the YCC is it's pulling people from so many different like Yale experiences. And there are a lot of people that I've met through YCC that there's no way would have ever run in the same circles. So I think that just bringing together a diverse group of people and experiences to one space gives you a really good idea of like what the general student body wants. But to your question, actually, could you repeat your question?
Which my question or?
Yeah, so your question was about how we connect with faculty.
Well, that was the last one, but I was originally before that I was asking about the mechanics of and then Stephanie asked about how do you arrive at a consensus of opinion or any kind of consensus from the students, and then you present that to who? And the other, I'll add another thing is, are the colleges involved, like the head of the college or the dean? I mean, it seems like that's also that, because back in the mid-century, that's how it was. It was a lot of these things were done through the dean or the head of the college.
So Iris and I don't necessarily work with residential college heads and deans as much because they're more focused on the residential college needs as opposed to the greater student body. But in terms of faculty, we've been much more intentional about connecting with faculty this year, particularly because a lot of the things that students ask for academics-wise will impact how faculty approach the classroom. So Iris and I connected with the chairs of the Faculty Senate at the beginning of this year, and we connected our academic policy team with the undergraduate education committee that the Faculty Senate has. And it's Professor Tosland who's like chairing it this year. And this has been really helpful in terms of like the things that YCC asks for. For example, this year we've been doing a lot of credit D fail work. And of course you can say like students want this, and then usually administration will be like, well, faculty doesn't. But this year we've been doing a lot of coordinated effort with faculty because faculty care about students' mental health and well-being, and they want them to be exploring these classes and not stressing about their grades instead of just actually absorbing knowledge. And so we've been meeting with Faculty Senate consistently throughout this entire semester, having conversations about how do we improve the level of exploration we have as Yale students, while also not having faculty freak out when a student is doing really bad in a class and intending to credit fail it and not telling faculty. And there's just lots of like miscommunication that we've been trying to I guess like marry this year. And then another thing is also students really want to be involved in professor hiring. They want to have an input in the people that will be like running their departments, and they want to see like a certain level of representation within certain departments. And so that's been like conversations we've had with faculty for this entire year.
Well, that's completely new. That was not happening in the 60s. The idea of undergraduate participation and having anything to say about faculty is unheard of. So
I just had a follow-up to my question about the student input, because we used the word consensus, which I don't necessarily think you used. How do you weigh sort of the feedback that you get from students? In other words, say you get something and 75% of the students say X, but there may be something in a survey or some comment that is pretty singular, but may be like really a key issue or making you aware of something that is worth your attention and bringing to the powers that be. How do you sift through this information that you get and deal with it more than just sort of a spreadsheet of data in terms of what seems to be significant and what you decide to carry forward.
Yeah, I guess. I think we don't get any really like absolute answers to any of our questions on the fall survey, like even in questions where our policy directors think that there will be 100% student consensus. There is disagreement in people who say, no, I don't really want credit fail reform, or like, no, like I really am not experiencing any struggles in this and I wouldn't benefit from this policy being enacted. And I think it's really important for us to then like, maybe this is just like a little bit of like my math like thinking coming in, but really looking at the breakdown by responses to other questions, seeing if there are like differences in how different class years are responding, differences in how like, because we can separate data by responses to some questions, like if students are self-reported as receiving financial aid, do they tend to respond in a different way to a question than those who are not self-reported receiving financial aid? And I guess like John and Jeff can also really talk to this and like how they dealt with these issues coming up, because I know that consensus in a campus of 6,000 plus students is very rare, but you oftentimes do hear a very overwhelming majority that is the loudest opinion in the room. And we kind of focus on using the data to see if that majority is actually supported by like the number of students who actually would benefit from it, with a recognition that like, yes, there are singular comments, and we like really like to hone in on open-ended responses that we get, because moving one way on, say like one issue that like some students are not totally in favor of, oftentimes means like, say like, even if it's better for say like 75% of campus, and like they report a better quality of life and the other 25% doesn't want it, I think it's important for us to address how to like really integrate those changes for the better of the student body, even when there is student disagreement, because Leleda and I are meant to represent not just our own opinions, but what we think is best for the institution in the long run. We do get pushback though. We get an occasional angry email or two.
John and Jeff, do you have anything to add about how things were, comparatively, a decade ago?
Yeah, I'll add one brief thing. I think in addition to being a conduit of student opinion, as we've been talking about, YCC also sometimes tries to act as a facilitator of direct student access to relevant administrators. I think there's some issues of such novelty, seriousness, diversity of opinion, intensity of opinion, that it's almost not worth trying to like represent an average answer from us to the administration, but rather put a diverse group of students directly in the room. And so during my time, one issue that really called for that approach was issues of hazing and sexual misconduct, of which there were some really striking and disturbing incidents during my year as president. And there's sort of a campus-wide reckoning of how are we going to approach this as a community going forward. And we realized that as a group, we didn't have anything close to the authority of opinion or experience on that topic, but many students did have striking views and perspectives from different walks of campus life. We thought it was important to have, for example, members of sports teams and fraternities who had been in some ways closer to some of the misconduct participating in the room and explaining how things work from their perspective, as well as students with a very different experience and perspective. So we facilitated a university-wide student committee on sexual misconduct that participated in the creation of what is now the official university-wide committee on sexual misconduct. So that originated during our year and probably would have happened, I would hope, without direct student input, but the exact shape of it, I imagine, was influenced by a bunch of students talking directly to administrators.
Yeah, and to add, I think what's great about our role and what's so fun about it is that there's a lot of creativity, because the kinds of things that people advocate for, some are very, very specific, some apply to everyone. Some have existed for a decade, some concerns arise overnight. Some concerns can be remedied very simply, some will take a long time. And I think as in student government, figuring out the best way to address the different concerns is really, really fun. And I think what is a little bit different than how I'm hearing the YCC being constituted now is that it seems very, very formalized now, which is, I think, is amazing, because I feel like when Jeff and I were in our roles, it was very sort of top down from us in terms of, you know, we were doing all of the policy stuff, all of the meetings, and coming up with all of these ideas. And I think having the infrastructure and support is tremendous. But to just give some examples of sort of how you address these different concerns and the difficulty of being one person tasked with representing everyone, I can just give a few examples. So one, I think, is understanding where your administration is in the context of the life cycle of Yale. So I was in office in a very unique time where President Levin was stepping down and Dean of Yale College, Mary Jo Miller, was stepping down, and we were selecting a new president. So a lot of the policy type initiatives that we would want to advocate for were almost impossible to do because the president was leaving and wasn't going to initiate policies, you know, as he was going out the door. So we sort of shifted to what was most prescient in our time, which was finding who the next university president was going to be and making sure that that selection process reflected the values of the students at Yale College. And like Iris, you know, mentioned, it was a survey with many questions. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Qualtrics surveys and, you know, crunching that data and drafting, you know, I think our report like 70 pages, you know, over 1,000 responses, and, you know, summarizing that information and then going into meetings and using these qualitative responses to illuminate the data and provide a human face and, you know, sort of common sense explanation for that. So that was sort of like the big policy thing. There were also things that popped up with faculty. So for one thing, there was a proposal to change the grading system at Yale, which was a huge controversy. And for that, our team decided to hold a town hall where we invited faculty members who were very pro, you know, this grading change to sort of debate it out with students in an open forum, which was super fun and was covered by the YDN. And that was a little bit more cantankerous, but I think that sort of matched what that issue needed. We also had, you know, before President Levin left, an open forum with him where we solicited questions and sort of picked questions from different topics and asked him, you know, in one of the large auditoriums, and had people come in, and that was covered as well. And then you have smaller concerns. So a thing that was always a big issue when I was in college was, what is your major going to be? And what even is, you know, the history major? What does that entail? Like, and so we hosted a series of like DUS dinners. So dinners with the directors of undergraduate studies for the different majors, so that people could have dinner with the different directors to get a sense for whether the major was for them. And that's like a hyper specific example. And, you know, another one is like Jeff, sort of off of what was going on campus. There was a big conversation on campus about alcohol and whether alcohol should be disciplined on campus, or, you know, how should we deal with on campus versus off campus drinking. And we held, you know, sort of task forces on that issue with different student groups, and also decided that we needed to it wasn't just a Yale College concern, but was university wide. So we worked with the student governments for the graduate school and the professional school. And we thought about the importance of having a university wide center where individuals could intermix to try to, you know, have socialization on campus. And we created a report, and I think that played, you know, some role in the creation of the student center, you know, a couple of years later. So, you know, depending on the issue, some things are really specific, and like has been stated, sometimes you just make the connection between the administrator and the student having the problem. Some things require a coalition and a lot of surveys and meetings and all of that. And I think what's overlaid on all of this are relationships. So at the end of the day, these administrators are people, and they need somebody that's there every week to be able to kind of translate this stuff into English and troubleshoot how to take student concerns into reality. So I think, like the current YCC, I feel like my life was, you know, 4 or 5 hours of YCC a day, and most of those were meetings with 1,001 administrators. And a lot of that is not seen by the general student population, but I think that's sort of our specialized role, especially as leaders in the student government, to be able to have those touch points and translate things as they're ongoing, so that you don't have big blow-ups on campus where there's a disconnect between what's going on as in the student's life and how an administrator is going about their day. So those are some tools that I felt like we had at our disposal. It sounds like now there's more formalized ways for more people to get involved, which is amazing. But yeah, those are sort of the fun parts of being creative in our role in student government.
Okay, I have a couple of maybe curious questions. Are a lot of I'm curious about the motivation of getting involved at a serious level with the council. So were any of you involved in student government in high school? And do you think that is, are you attracted to the council because you like that kind of sort of legislative policy making kind of activity, and that does that have anything to do with what you want to do or what you plan to do in the future?
Okay, I can go first. I did not do student government in high school. Yale was my first time experiencing any sort of politics type space. I got into it my first year, which is actually how I met Iris. We met on Zoom because we had a strange first year. And sort of the reason was I moved in to campus and I was just alone in my room, and I had 2 other suite mates, and everything was closed, and it was just rough. And I'm just not someone who could become friends with someone via GroupMe or Instagram DM. So I was like, okay, I kind of want to get into event planning, because I'm sure there's other first years that are really struggling socially, because that's kind of how student government starts when you're first year. You just plan events and get to know other first years in other colleges. So that's sort of my gateway into YCC. Then my second year, I got super into the policy side of things, because there's so much wrong with this institution. I mean, there's great things about it, of course, and we gain so much privilege from being here, but there are a lot of things that could be done better. And I was like, this organization is trying to do those things, so why am I not a part of it? And that was sort of how I got into the policy things. And now I'm doing it all the time, and it's basically my whole life. And I'm I don't know how I got to this place. In terms of is this something that I could see myself doing in the future? Absolutely not. I am suffering from my engineering degree, and I plan to use it, so I will not be in politics. But I think it's actually incredible experience. I mean, you're learning how to manage so many different things at once. I mean, the amount of emails that we get in a day is already I used to take 10 minutes to write an email, and now I'm doing it in between lectures it's nothing. And you're learning how to have so many conversations. You're learning about so many different experiences. I think the most important thing is you're learning how to listen. That's literally our job. We're just listening to people all the time. That's something that's applicable to anything you want to do in your life. I think that for me, I know that I want to be in the health space, and I think that having this much policy experience is incredible for that. And I think that this has been a really translatable experience to anything that anyone would want to do.
Okay, what about the other panel members?
Well, Iris, what motivated you to get involved?
I did do student government in high school. I think in senior year I was my high school student body vice president. So maybe history is repeating itself. But I guess in this sense, I think it was really hard for me to imagine a world in which I couldn't directly meet with the people in charge to understand why things were the way they were. I think in a lot of ways, even when people are hurting from the way, even in high school or at Yale, the way an institution chooses to do things is oftentimes there are institutional reasons behind that. And trying to figure those out and being able to talk through and relay a student experience was I think like for me, it almost seemed impossible not to have that kind of access to express. Well, in high school, it was mostly my own grievances. But like I guess like maturing 4 years later, others too. And I think, well, like as Aleda mentioned, we were both in first year class council together. I knew the president, well, like recently, I guess like elected president at the time, Elisa Bahri. We were actually roommates at a summer camp before my like ninth grade experience. So I came to Yale and she was the one person I knew, and I was like, I think she's really cool. So I'm gonna go do what she does. And she was the president of the YCC my first year. I applied to be a deputy academics chair under her administration. Then last year, Lillian and I led the academic policy team together. So I feel like I really do. I spent a lot of time in, I guess, the academic sphere, and like the word credit defail right now kind of triggers like a fight or flight instinct from me. But I think to me, like the reasons that I look back on it have always been this idea that I think it's really important to like be able to convey what you're feeling in the sense of like college is meant to be a really like transformative time and experience. And I think Yale has been that for me and a lot of other people. But that doesn't mean that it can't improve. And I also think that even if like in times it's doing really well, like I think it's important for administrators to know that they're doing really well, and to be able to like figure out why things are the way they are is like very important, because in my mind, if I don't have any sense of continuity, I just kind of float and meander my own thoughts, which is not good. The Lida knows. Sometimes I'll just like sit and think for an hour and get very little if I don't talk it out with someone. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Jeff, John, were you in student government in high school?
Yeah, I was, and I guess I've remained involved in policy things throughout my life so far. So definitely some continuity there. But in addition to that basic inclination, a reason I would add of why I was attracted to being involved in student government at Yale is that there's so many ways to experience life as an undergraduate at Yale. And the thought of only living one of them was very frustrating and constraining to me. And part of the appeal of YCC is that you get to take an interest in all the different slices of undergraduate life and have a stake and be invested in them. So I wasn't involved in the theater world, but I wanted to know what was going on there. What do those people care about? What are they concerned about? I wasn't a science major. I really have no idea what science majors do, but you know, I wanted to know like, what's that like? What are their concerns? What problems do they have? You know, same thing for any slice you can pick. And then moreover, to like knit together those different experiences into one cohesive one, as I was saying before. But yeah, I think I was attracted to like being in a position where you had a reason to care about all the different other ways of being a student at Yale, besides the ones that were directly relevant to me.
Definitely. And I guess to add, I did do student government in high school, but I definitely do not see myself as like a student government person. I love people. I just love people. I got on campus. I'm like, I love events. Let's throw, you know, I did freshman and sophomore class council, and your budget's like $2,000. And I'm like, we're going to have parties. We're going to fundraise. We're going to just, you know, I love like grassroots, like let's just get a couple people together and like put something on and like, you know, express joy. And I think like Lileda said, like you get more involved with the policy side. And, you know, I think if you were to look at my friends in college, it is such a random assortment of like every walk of life. So I was hearing problems from all of my athlete friends, my theater friends, my STEM friends. So you know, I think when it came time to like run, I in my mind, I was like, oh, there are like some very simple solutions here for a lot of my friends. Let's go, you know. And I just knocked on a bunch of doors and like talked to people about what their problems were. And I love people, and I also love conflict. I think I enjoy when people disagree with me or are upset with me. And I think that served very well in the role. So I do feel it's a little bit accidental, but I really enjoyed my experience, although I do not miss the number of emails. I feel you both so much. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Llewellyn, I just wanted to make sure you can see that Orlando and Heidi have their hands raised.
Oh, I wasn't paying attention to that.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, I was going to announce that without paying attention, that the people other than the panel should speak up now. And so I see, now that I know, there are two hands up. Heidi, would you like to say something?
Hi. I guess to start with some context for my question, I'll introduce myself. I was the YCC Vice President from 2018 to 2019. So it's very cool to see where YCC is today and also to hear from some of our predecessors. So I wanted to ask about the balance between policy and activism, which I think is something that our administration certainly was trying to balance. And I know especially the past few years for Yale and for higher education very broadly have been quite tumultuous. I think for us, it was often difficult because a lot of the policy work we were doing requires a lot of trust and close relationships with administrators, whereas a lot of activism is very more like loud and directed towards students broadly, as opposed to the finer aspects of policy. So that was something that we were trying to balance. And I'm curious to hear how YCC is looking at that now. And then also whether that was something in the past that Jeff and John, you all faced as well.
Yeah, I can start off with kind of how we've been balancing it now. I think to the point of, maintaining positive relationships with administration, that's essential to the work of the YCC. As much as it hurts to say it, we need them to say yes to things for us to actually get things done. So, Iris and I have been very cognizant of that this year, making sure that they're collaborative relationships, and that they will continue to do so in the future, because we're setting a precedent having like a new dean of Yale College this year for how YCC will interact with Dean Lewis for the next coming years. So we've been very intentional about that. But at the same time, I think in all of our meetings with administration, we've been very clear that, we're representatives of students. We're not, megaphones for what Yale wants students to hear. And so when there are moments of activism on campus, Iris and I are the first ones emailing whoever it is, and we're like, how can the YCC support you? This year, we put in a new position within our structure, a student organizing liaison. Basically, this individual is in contact with all of the advocacy organizations on campus. They go to all of their meetings, they help with all of their organizing efforts, and at any point the YCC needs to step in with policy support or setting up meetings with administration or facilitating conversations, then Iris and I will do so. We've also been trying to implement forms of advocacy into our policy work this year. We've had a group of senators that has been working on getting free laundry for students, and this has been something that YCC has been talking about literally forever. But this year we've sort of included mobilizing, students to tell administration this is something that they want. So lots of senators and members of different residential colleges have been postering, this is what the current laundry situation is, this is how much we're paying for it. These laundry machines are not working. We've been doing alumni outreach and posting in parent group chats. There was a template for an email that you could send to your residential college dean, to the dean of Yale College, that was circulated. And so Dean Lewis was getting lots of emails, which he told us about. But I don't think that activism and the YCC are mutually exclusive. I think that everything that's happening outside of our Yale bubble is very relevant to how we're experiencing Yale. And I think that at its core, YCC is an advocacy organization. At least that's how I want to think of it. We're constantly advocating for things that students need. And I think that it is important to be loud and to, be in the face of this is what we believe in and this is what we want. And I think that, of course, we have our polite meetings where we're like, oh, this is the policy proposal, and handing over a page. And that's totally one facet of the YCC. And I think it's an effective one. But I think also being a part of movements that are already happening on campus is just as essential, because we are representing all of the student body. And so how we're engaging in activism really says a lot about us as leaders.
Yeah, I can just like emphasize one part of what Lolita was saying. I think we do need administration to say yes to us. It pains me to say it. It's just like physically painful sometimes. But I think that one thing that Lyd and I have learned is that one thing that Dean Lewis really appreciates is having advance notice. So if an issue is like bubbling to the surface of the student conscious, and you can kind of tell, like it takes maybe 36 hours or like even a few days for something to rise to the attention of most of the student populace. And within that time frame, we can kind of predict whether or not students really want to like make a more like loud stance that's like public. And I think being able to communicate that to administrators, not in a way that's saying, oh, like you should look out for this, but like this is something that should be on your radar. So that way they are not quite as startled and it's not as if they're being shocked out of the blue, but rather an issue that is most oftentimes, I think almost always like well-founded, rooted in things that have existed for a long time that people like are suffering from. That it has kind of taken off, I think, a combative edge that some people think that activism has with regard to our relationships with administrators. But yeah, definitely a balance and an integration still in the works.
It's really interesting to hear this and to reflect that I think that my years on YCC were sort of the tail end of a period of relatively divorced student activism from the structure of student government. My sense is that maybe even, I'm curious what John will say, even by the beginning of John's time, and certainly like 1 or 2 years after John, my sense is that it completely changed. But I really do regret this, that my sense is not just in their absence from YCC, but when I think back on the students I would have thought of as activists during my time, I feel like they were just so right on like most of the issues. Like there was a major endowment divestment from fossil fuels campaign. There was a relatively slim portion of the student body that were actively engaged in that. And they feel prophetic to me, like 12 years after the fact. And I will admit that like that was in no way integrated, represented within the structure of YCC. And so I'll just say like, it's very cool to hear how thoughtful you guys are today about combining the moral force of those groups with the reality that you've spoken to about needing to work closely with the administration.
Definitely. And I think this is in some ways, Heidi, like the question, and I'm sure that, you know, this was probably the question for you as well. And I think it's even hard sometimes within, you know, it's one student group where like, I'm maybe not the only one, but you don't necessarily pick who you're working with, right? Like everyone, at least my year, was independently elected. And you have this group of people that now have to come together, and they have different views, because some people join student government to be far more sort of activist in their role, and some care more about pragmatic issues, and you have to resolve that internally as well. I think the idea of what you all have structurally now, where there's a conduit to these different student organizations and advocacy groups, is perfect for that, because without that, you're doing it on an ad hoc basis, and it's just really tough. I can speak to my year. There were some things that really bothered me, but did not, I don't think, resonate necessarily with the rest of the council. And you know, there were times where I wanted to maybe like write op-eds, at least, you know, from coming from me, so it's not from the organization, but me more active using the Yale Daily News, and that was sort of frowned upon against from some of the teammates on my side. And you have to, you know, kind of figure that out. It's hard enough to figure that out internally, whether even putting aside how you deal with the many student advocacy topics that people care about. And yeah, like Jeff said, you know, I think the fossil fuel issue, there was a very small number but very powerful group of students that were constantly advocating, and I think our administration probably could have done a better job of making those concerns known to the administration. But when you're juggling so many different issues, and some issues might not be sort of the majority of what the student campus cares about at that moment, it's sort of difficult. I will say, you know, in my first comments, I think a lot of what the YCC looks like depends on this life cycle of where Yale College is at. And I think Jeff is absolutely right that his administration is probably the tail end of sort of a less active student life. And I was sort of the beginning of this period of a lot more upheaval, student protests, and more cantankerous relationships between administration and students. So I think that looks very different depending on the pulse of the university, but was a topic that I thought about all the time, and I still think about all the time, especially when topics are coming up now. When I read the Yale Daily News, I think like Jeff, like, oh man, like I had an opportunity to be more involved with that and I didn't, and reflect upon why is something that's I think about a lot.
Orlando, did you have your hands up?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the conversation, and I want to ask for a reflection, maybe someone to comment actually on a topic that's kind of related, but Jeff, you brought this up offline about how national issues and controversies filter down into campus level politics and inform the agenda, and how, you know, any of you as leaders balanced kind of being responsive to what's coming into the university versus really representing the needs of students who are actually on campus at the time.
Yeah, okay, I can start again. I think that things happening around the world and things happening at Yale are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I mean, we all come from very different places when we come to Yale, and so we're bringing in a lot of different experiences and different places that we call home. And so when things are happening around the world, they're essentially happening at Yale, and I think it's important that the YCC is responding accordingly. Obviously, policy-wise, there's nothing we can do in that sense. All of the policy work that we do is really Yale focused, and any action items that we have is within like our Yale bubble. But I think that the YCC acknowledging that something is happening around the world is really important, because it's validating the experiences of students on campus. Because the YCC is representative of the student body, by being silent or by being inactive, it means that the student body is being silent and is being inactive. And so I think that it's really important for Iris and I to know everything that's happening on campus, of course, but know things that are also happening outside of this campus that are affecting how students are engaging with each other, with their academics, with their health, etc. And we've had like a few instances like that this year even, where people will email us and say, you know, this is happening, I really care about this issue, and I want the YCC to release a statement about it, or to ask administration to release a statement about it, just to show that, you know, the student body is standing in solidarity with something. And we've done it this year already a few times, where the YCC will say, like, you know, we have this stance as an organization, although we are cognizant that we don't represent the entire student body. At the very least, the elected officials of this organization that were elected by the student body hold this perspective and stand with these students who are experiencing these things. And I think simply doing that is the first step, but it is, you know, as many steps as we can take given like the limited access that we have. But I think it's really important, and I don't necessarily see them as two different things. I don't think that, you know, politics or controversies happening around the world are separate from the things that the YCC are doing.
Thank you for that. Thank you for your leadership in this.
I was reminded that we only have 4 minutes left, so there's maybe time for one question more. Stephanie, you're happy?
Well, my question's another follow-up question to the question that was talking about activism. Iris, I think you said it was like 36 hours. That was approximately the time that, you know, something starts and then it kind of bubbles up. It occurred to me when you said that even since the time that Jeff and John were on campus, things like social media, texting, the means by which something can go from something that happens on a street corner to the whole, you know, campus is on fire about something is like that. And those very mechanisms can even be the fuel that feeds something the more that you sort of are getting people to, react, and the idea of even getting information correct is, almost impossible in some ways. I mean, I don't know exactly what the question is, but I see John shaking his head, and I'm wondering, do you get things happen that sort of become the proverbial tempest in the teapot? And ultimately something may get overinflated that, could have been smoothed over very quickly at an earlier stage. I don't know what Jeff and John's response to that is, and Iris's and the latest.
I can touch on this really briefly, then hand it off to someone else because I don't want to dominate this conversation. But I feel like most often when things bubble to the surface, it is because Yale now, like with social media, also just it feels like everyone knows each other. Like you'll meet someone new and they're actually class friends with one of your old suite mates or something like that. So news gets around campus very quickly, I would say. And oftentimes the things that get the most attention or like gather the most like intense support in a very short period of time are things that I think sometimes like yes, like could have been directly addressed in a less public manner, but often the times the reason and the impetus for which they have risen to public attention is a more immediate, like it's usually an event, or like something like if people think something has unacceptable has happened, they're immediately very vocal about it, and social media makes it really easy to share what they think the relevant details are. So I think the answer to your question is yes, in the sense that sometimes there are things that could probably have been resolved ideally earlier in a calmer, more like, I guess, like conversational fashion rather than like going up and like proverbially like knocking at the door angrily. But I do think that the issues that do rise to the student conscience are like always important. John and Jeff, also my best friend Leleda.
Well, we're at our last few seconds here. So it's probably time to roll it up. Is that my job, Yvette?
That's okay. I think I could do it. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists, Leleda and Iris, and Jeff and John, for being with us tonight and for this really interesting conversation. I don't know about the rest of you, but I could spend another hour asking you questions. There's so much I would love to know. So really appreciate you taking the time right before, especially Leleda and Iris, before finals and all that. And thank you so much to Llewellyn for moderating this discussion. And before we go, real quick, Steph, do you want to give everyone an overview of next week's Thursday show topic?
Thank you, Yvette. Next week, we're going to have two panelists, one of whom is a young alum, but the topic is going to be on sponsoring Ukrainian refugees and how one in fact can get involved. The particular twosome that we're having work for particular organizations that help collective sponsoring of refugees so that it becomes a supportive effort rather than just a singular dive into what may seem to be rather overwhelming. So these two people are also, have been to Ukraine, although certainly not recently, and can actually help, even provide sort of more insight to what they perceive is happening there to that war-torn community. So next week, 6 o'clock, and I hope some of you will join us. Thanks, Yvette.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thanks again to everyone for joining, and have a great night, everyone.